Well, if we think of risk and protective factors as part of a public health way of thinking, then we realise that each one of us has risk factors and protective factors in relation to a whole range of physical conditions and in relation to emotional well-being. And that any one risk factor should not be given too much weight and be seen as loading the dice toward pathology or dysfunction. So, for example, the risk factor of poverty. Families where there are warm and enduring bonds, where there is high morale, where there's a deep commitment to their children, may be embedded in strong extended family networks, which are much richer and much more supportive than the social networks of a family which is far more affluent in material sense, but is actually devoid of extended family structure and where those qualities within the family may be absent. So in relation to any one risk factor, whether it's poverty, whether it's social isolation, whether it's a parent's history of mental illness, we need to be very careful that we don't slip into thinking about deficits. We also need to understand that we all carry risk factors, but they don't always get expressed in problems because the protective factors are buffers. And so it's on building the protective factors that we can often have the greatest impact, because sometimes we can't do a lot about the risk factor. If someone brings to parenting a childhood experience of their own, of poor nurturing, we can't undo the history. But we can build on the protective factor of attachment through a very nurturing and sensitive relationship, say by a midwife and this pregnant woman, and a continuity of care that can help create a level of parent-infant attachment in this family which was stronger than in the family of origin of this mother. So understanding the protective factors, that's the foundation on which we build to prevent child abuse and neglect. Resilience is something that these days people have spoken and written about. Fundamentally, it's the capacity to bounce back or respond to adversity. We all face adversity. Often, if we look at what enables someone to respond positively to adversity, we find that they bring with them from their own family backgrounds experiences which help them to form healthy relationships, to seek and be able to use support from others. And some families where there is greater vulnerability have had experiences in childhood where it's harder to trust, where people have left you, abandoned you. So for a midwife or nurse to form an effective partnership with a vulnerable family, they may need to persist in engaging. They may need to reach out with greater warmth and with a greater commitment and not be put off by a behaviour which might say, go away, I don't need you. If that's the message you're getting, it may be that you're needed more than ever. And that by offering that relationship based on trust, on empathy, the respect and the honesty, that you can actually create resilience and nurture resilience in families that have not yet been able to acquire that. That's an extraordinary gift.
Midwives and nurses have been often told to be non-judgmental. It's written in every textbook. But I get very concerned about that because I think it's our role to make judgments, particularly in the area of child abuse and child protection. We really need to, rather than not be judgmental, we need to put a brake on our judgments, and before we go in to see a parent or a family, to make sure that we leave our assumptions at the door and not to take those stereotypes and assumptions with us to inform our practice. I think that that's really important. And I was reading the other day a really interesting quote, and it said that nurses need to have an insatiable curiosity about the people that they're working with. And I think that's a really important thing, because then we can find out about the histories of the families, and often these histories are quite painful for us as nurses and midwives to have to deal with. An insatiable curiosity helps you to uncover some of the hidden histories that we really need to know about as child and family health nurses and midwives. It's not that we want to be sticky beaks or get any pleasure out of knowing those difficult histories, but we need to have a context from which we work with parents. We need to know if a mother has been abused herself, because that's going to really impact on the way that she parents her child, or if a father has been physically abused as a young boy. Maybe his anger control mechanisms aren't well refined, and he's going to need some support and help with that when he becomes a parent. And often when parents do abuse their children, and this is not to forgive them for doing that, but we need to understand often it's out of fear, because that's their default and that's what happened to them. And it can be really difficult, and they often feel very guilty, and particularly if they disclose to you as a nurse or a midwife, you need to be able to take that in the spirit that it was offered to you, and that certainly is you have to constantly keep in mind the protection of the child.